Welcome to Native Bidaské, Native News Online's weekly spotlight on the people making news and leading change in Indian country.
Welcome to another edition of Native Bidaské. I'm Levi Rickert, your host, and I have two distinguished gentlemen with me tonight. And we're going to talk about a subject that's very, very difficult to talk about, actually, and it's about the lack of law enforcement on Indian reservations throughout Indian country. And recently, Senator Tester sent a letter to the Government Accountability Office, and he's demanding answers why the Bureau of Indian Affairs has not adequately funded law enforcement on Indian reservations. And so with me today, we have the president of the Fort Belknap Indian Community, President Jeffrey Stiffarm, and Tom Rodgers, who's a Blackfeet. He's president of Carlyle Consulting, and both of them can with a lot of knowledge on this subject. So welcome to Native Bidaské, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Hey, let's start with you, President Stiffarm. You know, Senator Tester, he's your senator, and he sent the letter. Why do you think he sent the letter, first of all?
I think he's finally, realizing how important these issues are in Montana, and how big of a issue it's starting to become nationwide with the public safety issues we've been having in reservations throughout Indian country, not just in Fort Belknap, but we have these same issues in every reservation in Montana, and that we have 7 of them here. And the biggest issue there is this, we're short funded to properly protect our people, especially the ones that, tribes that run their own law enforcement with 638 contract from the federal government for the BIA. And I've been in politics for 7 years now, and I have always, every time I went to DC or Senator Tester or Senator Daines, whoever, I see, I raise these questions, these issues with them about the lack of public safety, the lack of funding to properly, pay and serve our community members for what they deserve, and our land mass is almost 700,000 acres. Our population within the exterior boundaries that live on the reservations is approximately around, I say over 5,000 population. 3 main communities here, and they're a great distance apart, and it's pretty rural.
And I understand it's the size of Rhode Island. Is that correct?
Yes.
Land mass.
Yeah.
That's. Hey, Tom, I want to go to you, and I know you're very concerned about this subject too. Why do you think Senator Tester wrote the letter? It's not because he's running for re-election, is it? Or
the Senator Tester has always had a great love for the Native people of Montana and nationally. He's also very mindful. When I worked on the staff for Senator Baucus, I always believed that the GAO was a great investigative tool to bring independent eyes to raise awareness of an issue. Because if you don't measure something, you don't value it. In order to get awareness to this, you need to measure it. And budgets signal priorities. And the fact that there has not been nearly the adequate funding means this is not, and numbers don't lie. Numbers will tell the story. And I've used tax-exempt bonds. I used GAO reports to highlight how tribes were not being treated equally as state and local governments for tax-exempt bonds. Senator Tester has used a GAO investigative report to touch off the huge dialogue on MMIW. If you go back and you Google Senator Tester and MMIW, you'll see that the investigative report started with the GAO. So this is nothing new. This is a way, once again, to have an independent body, which is not conflicted by in-house agendas or personalities or what may have you, but to bring incredible awareness and to measure the systemic problem that confronts Indian country, and specifically the reservations of Montana, because we're losing a whole generation. And it's an incredible tragedy. So the Senator Tester has just heard the passion of people like President Stiffarm, other tribal leaders in Montana. And how can you walk away with not demonstrating empathy and compassion and then act on it? And this is what the GAO report will tell us. It'll tell us a story of the lack of awareness, the lack of budgetary priorities when it comes to this incredible public safety concern.
Yeah. And President Stiffarm, you and I talked a couple days ago, and you really impressed me with your history. You've been in politics, as you mentioned, 7 years, but prior to that, you've been in law enforcement for what, 20 plus years. You worked your way up, and you were actually the police chief, right, of your tribe?
Yes, I was. I started out as a game warden and worked my way through the ranks to up to sergeant lieutenant. Then I was a director of our fish and wildlife program. Then I moved over to the chief of police. My later years, I guess, in law enforcement. So I had every position that we had in Fort Belknap in law enforcement. So I pretty much know, since we took over in '97, the ins and outs of what we went through and what we struggled with.
Hey, can you tell our viewers, because you really got to me on this one too. I've actually been thinking about our conversation since we talked. But you mentioned back in 1997. Tell us what your budget was, and then tell us what your budget is currently.
Okay. And prior to 1997, our public safety, our law enforcement was run by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They had Bureau of Indian Affairs police officers here patrolling the reservation and basically ran our services. At that time, our tribal council contracted it from the BIA 638 contracted. They wanted our own people, police their own people, basically what they decided to do. So they got the contract signed, and our annual base funding that we got in 1997 was 1.2 million. And they were, at that time, the tribe hired 10 police officers, including the chief of police and the sergeant, at $10 an hour. Fast forward to where we are at today, August 2024, our base funding is 1.3 million, increased 100,000 in 24 years, 25 years.
Wow.
That's pretty despicable.
Despicable. Yeah, it really is. And I did analysis. I mean, it didn't even keep with the rate of inflation. If it was kept with the rate of inflation, it would be 2.3 million versus 1 point. You guys are $1 million short. You've gone backwards that much. Hey, Tom, what? And you have extensive workings in Washington, been involved with working on the senatorial staff and lobbying, etc. Why do you think this is a big major problem? Why is there such a big lack of funding for law enforcement on Indian reservations?
It's confounding to me, but it reminds me of the. It truly does. It reminds me of the MMIW issue. Started working on that almost 12, 14 years ago. And
nobody wanted to talk about it back then. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah. Remember, Levi? I mean, there was this incredible crisis in Indian country, but very few people were. And even today, Levi, when you say we're losing 6,000 Native women and children to traffickers a year, people are absolutely astounded. They can't believe that number. They think that almost you are engaging in deception. And this is the same thing. When you tell people who are non-Native, the numbers that President Stiffarm is highlighting, people think this cannot be happening in America. And so everything in Indian country seems to be almost like a crisis. And you move from crisis to crisis to crisis. Mm-hmm. And here we have a crisis once again, over a decade long. There's been very few preventive measures. Now we have all this attention. Oh my God, there's a rush to, as there should be, on MMIW. Department of Justice finally gets involved. But remember, that's another problem. I know we're harping on the BIA today, as we should. But there are no real champions for us at the Department of Justice. And forgive me, I'm just going to call it like it is. We have had to fight the Department of Justice for dollars and for protection historically. There's far too many people at the Department of Justice who have little or no awareness of Indian country. Mm-hmm. Now, I know they will say, we have the Office of Tribal Justice. I get that. But it is far, far too difficult. And you know this, Levi, on so many issues that the Department of Justice has found to be wanting when it comes to Native American issues. And so you take the BIA and you overlay it with the Department of Justice. I don't care if it was Democratic, Republican, whatever. There are gradations of betterment. There are gradations of being worse. Mm-hmm. But there is a constant theme when it comes to the Department of Justice and Native Americans. And it's not positive. And so I say that reluctantly, but directly and honestly. And so once again, we have an issue that is allowed to metastasize like a cancer, mm-hmm. cancer. And now we have a situation where it's an overwhelming crisis, and we have to engage in exposing the issue to the media, shaping the story, having an investigative body come in, independent, and investigate to a certain degree, our own Native brothers and sisters. And we have to have a senatorial office get involved. Now, what does this remind you of again? The MMIW crisis. Mm-hmm. And once again, people were found wanting and short. And I understand there's only so many hours in the day. I get that. I remember where I worked on the Hill. How could I keep up with 200 or 300 phone calls? You have to prioritize. Mm-hmm. And we are losing a generation. It's time to prioritize. I mean, you heard the rest of society in this country. You would have thought that there was martial law in the streets the last election cycle, didn't you? In 2020, yeah. There was, my God, that people are running rampant in the streets. Now that it involves Native Americans, where is that hue and cry?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and President Stiffarm, I think you also told me with almost 700,000 acres you have, size of Rhode Island, comparable. How many law enforcement officers do you have?
7.
Wow.
That's including the chief of police.
That's shameful. Now, and I guess I really want to get to the crux of this because, Tom, you mentioned we're losing generation. Fentanyl is running rampant on Indian reservations, not just in Montana, but we have done extensive coverage on that. Mr. President, talk about how bad it is and talk about the cartels and why they exist, in your opinion.
Well, the reason why the cartels come to reservations is several reasons. One of the major reasons is tribes don't have jurisdiction over non-members. They know we cannot touch them, arrest them, detain them, or anything. The other reason is, reasons behind this is, they look like us, same dark skin, dark mm-hmm. hair, so they blend in a lot more easily. They get in a relationship with a tribal member and they set up shop, and they hide. It's a safe haven for them because they know we cannot touch them. But what's really frustrating about this is the federal government doesn't step in and help, whether it's the FBI, whether it's the Border Patrol, or whether it's DEA. They don't come in and help. They don't patrol or even when asked in particular Border Patrol, we're about 40 or 50 miles south of the Canadian border. So we got Border Patrol coming through our reservation quite a bit, but they just pass through because we've got a major highway on the northern end of the reservation, so they drive through. But we call and ask them if we run in across the Mexican and undocumented, and we call and ask them to come check this person out. They don't come no more. They used to in our early years when I first started out at Belknap. They used to come and detain and take them to their local border patrol office and run them. And whether they were not documented or not, they would take them off our hands. But the last, from what the chief said, probably the last 5-10 years, they have not been stepping in and helping out that way. With the FBI, to them, it has to be a major crime for them to even investigate. Then they will not prosecute it unless they're 99.99% that they're going to win the case. So it's pretty frustrating that the feds are allowing this to happen, and it's their job to help protect our people because we cannot do it against non-members. We can do civil, we can give them a speeding ticket, but that ain't going to do no good because they're never going to come to court anyway, tribal court to pay a speeding fine. So our hands are tied, whether it's jurisdiction wise, whether it's funding wise, whether it's resources wise. So we are way behind barrel here, and they know it. The cartels know it. The people that want to commit crimes know it, and that's why they come here. It's easier. Like Paul Harvey said. And he said it about a lot of different reservations. You want to get away with murder or serious crime, go to a reservation because nothing we can do to you unless the feds step up, which I don't see that happening in the near future. I testified several times in DC in hearings on drug cartels, and those congressmen that were sitting in them hearings are pretty shocked to hear our stories from different tribal leaders on how this is happening and how long it's been happening. A reservation west of us, probably about a little over an hour drive, the Rockaway Reservation with Chippewa Cree tribal members. They had a double homicide probably a few months ago directly related to the cartel. Then they just had another one maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago, another cartel homicide directly related to the cartel over fentanyl. So it's getting pretty bad in Rocky Boy. Fort Belknap, we haven't had any homicides. What little law enforcement officers we do have, they've been working their butts off and trying to prevent them from setting up shop. But they are here. They come in and they drop off their drugs and they pick up their money and they leave. As far as I know, last time when I talked to the chief, he's pretty sure that they're not living here, but they're here, more than we know. And what they do is they create a distraction. So they'll call our dispatch or have somebody call dispatch, say there was a fight or accident or something like that in a remote part of the reservation. So our one officer that's probably on duty will respond. And then they'll come in on the other side and make their drop and pick up their money. And that's how they usually work that operation. They've been doing that for quite a while.
Well, thank you for telling us that story. I think, I'm almost speechless, actually. And Tom, you know me well. I'm not very rarely speechless, but Tom, we can laugh about that. Something like this, you got to laugh about something. But no, in all seriousness, Tom, you're based in Washington. What can be done? What can be done?
Oh, it's like I said, you need to. I did a documentary 6 years ago called Somebody's Daughter. And the reason I named that is because a great majority, no, that's fair. That's not fair. Far too many people don't seem to have the awareness of what Native American people live through in this country. And so when I was reflecting on what I should name the documentary, I wanted it to encompass everybody in our country. And it brought me back to the words, well, you might not have liked her or known her, but she was somebody's daughter. And so that's what I say about this, is this is going to require almost a task force effort. What you do in these things, they're not one issue. They're a campaign, and they need to be run like a campaign. You need to shape the story. The one narrative has always been that the cartels are coming across the border in the southern border. And you see that on the nightly news from different news channels. Mm-hmm. There needs to be a reframing of that narrative, that their narratives are now at the northern border. The cartels are at the northern border, and they are in our communities, and they are using drugs. They are using human trafficking. Like I said, if this was existing with this lack of amount of resources there, I don't know if it was John Diller or whatever gangster criminal that was in the 2030s. He used to say, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Why do you go to reservations? Because there's no one there. Mm-hmm. The FBI is siloed. The DEA is siloed. The BIA is siloed. Our tribal police are treated like second-class citizens. There is no sense of crisis in Indian country for our youth and our women. And the only way you can do this is you've got to run a campaign. And it's election year. And politicians respond to organized ideas, organized votes, and organized money. And then you shape the story around that, and you get in their face, and you say, what are you going to do? I don't believe in any words. What are you going to do? And budgets signal priorities, Levi. You know this as you run your business. You budget what's important to you. Now, we have to hold the people who work for us to account. And now we're going to have an independent body come in and say, what have you been doing? Why have you failed? And where has all that money been going that we've had in all of these major bills that the Biden administration has been very kind to pass? But where is that money going? Mm-hmm. And the tribal leaders are not feeling it on the ground in their communities when it comes to public safety.
Yeah, it's $46 billion. That's with a B, the last I heard. Chief, or excuse me, you were the police chief. Mr. President, what's the actual number of needed officers there? Seven on a reservation the size of Rhode Island. Just you used the word despicable. It's very despicable. What's the formula? You know, borrowing from your time you were police chief and even now as president of the tribe.
The numbers that our wish list numbers is we're looking at least 20. We're hoping for 20.
So you're about a third of the way there. Yeah.
Yes, about a third. And we sued Bureau of Indian Affairs, Office of Justice Services, OJS, almost 2 years ago now. And we're finally starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel. We should be going to court maybe spring of this coming year. And the reason why we sued OJS is the lack of funding for public safety for our people here at Fort Belknap. And there's other tribes that have sued them, and there's other tribes that are on the cusp of suing them here soon. The Blackfeet tribe, one my close friend, or one who's a Rodgers horses, his tribe, they're going to be suing the BIA, similar to what we have been doing also. So it's not just a Fort Belknap issue; it's an issue across the country.
It really is.
And Tom, Levi, can I say something? Levi,
yes, sir.
Something? As the president just highlighted, leadership is lonely. And what the president has done and what other tribal leaders are doing, this is not something we welcome. This is not something that brings remotely a smile to our face. But there's a greater good at issue. This is about, people always say when you ask them, how could this have occurred in America? And they go, that was my ancestors. And my response to them is, what type of ancestor do you want to be? Let's forget about your ancestors and what they might have done or didn't do or whatever. Might have been good people, might have been horrible people. But the bottom line is, what type of ancestor do you want to be? Mm-hmm. And what legacy do you want to leave? And that's the measuring stick of life. What is your legacy? Yeah. And only through leadership and the loneliness of leadership. The loneliness, because it's lonely when you lead. Because everybody else is nothing but sheep. And that's when you know who you are.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, we have limited time. I'm going to let the president have the last word, and then I promise you, let's get back together within 6 weeks and talk about this again and see if there's been any response to Senator Tester's letter. It still will be before the election, and let's see what's happening. Mr. President, what would you like to say to close us down?
Well, I guess what I'd like to say to our listeners, and I hope other tribal leadership is listening to this or watching this, is consistency and persistent pays off. I've been at this, like I said, for 7 years, push this issue of lack of compassion from the Bureau of Indian Affairs for the tribes that they serve. And they do serve the tribes, but they treat us like the redheaded stepchild. And what's really frustrating about this is the BIA is run by tribal memberships. People that are enrolled in other tribes treat tribes like this. That's what's really frustrating about this. And they look down at us like second-class citizens, And what really irked me was a few years ago, President Biden gave Bureau of Indian Affairs law enforcement, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking over $90 million or something like that. Maybe I'm probably wrong, but it's probably more than that for law enforcement. You know what Fort Belknap's cut was out of that millions? $64,000.
Oh, wow.
That gave us to help run our law enforcement. And what we're trying to figure out, and what with this letter from Senator Tester, is how do they distribute the money that they receive to the tribes? How do they make that decision versus when they give it to their own programs that they run? And I kind of told you when we talked a few days ago, we had one of our guys on our team work for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He's a tribal member here at Fort Belknap, and he was the chief of police down there in Mescalero Apache Reservation down there in New Mexico. And it's about the same size as Fort Belknap and the same population, but it's run by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Their base funding, I was told, was at $5 million.
Wow.
Huge disparity in the funding.
Yeah, you get a fourth of that. Yeah.
So that's where I'm really frustrated at, is tribal people treating tribal members like this, and it's.
Well, I promise you we'll come back and bring this issue back to the forefront, because this is an issue that needs to be addressed. And Tom, you're right. There's a multitude of issues in Indian country. And both of you gentlemen, thank you very much for being part of this. And we will, I promise you, we'll be back with the story again. And to our viewers, in the meantime, if you haven't registered to vote, it's time to register to vote. We need to get politicians who will take care of Indian country in Washington. So, Chi Miigwech, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Native Bidaské.
Thank you.
If you appreciate what we do here at Native News Online, we invite you to donate to support our continued work covering Indian country. You can scan this code with your smartphone or go to the link located below this video to donate today. We greatly appreciate your support. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And be sure to scan this code or go to the link below to subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you for joining us today, and please be sure to join us again next week for another episode of Native